Hello again, you're watching the press preview. It's our first look at Saturday's front pages. And it's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the journalist and commentator Sam Ashworth-Hayes. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. A very good evening to you. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of those front pages for you, starting with the FT, leading with the rise in the energy price cap, saying millions face energy poverty as household bills set to surge by 80%. Well, it's going to be a catastrophe. That's what the Mirror is saying. The rise in the energy price cap will become as they call for the government to act. Meanwhile, the Express quotes Prime Minister Boris Johnson that a pipeline of cash is on the way to struggling households. The Mail says energy hikes may wipe out savings for 6 million people. Lives will be lost, warns the front of tomorrow's Guardian, in reference to the hike in energy prices set to come in October. Here's tomorrow's Eye reporting on Liz Truss's U-turn on energy handouts, saying she's set to give extra winter fuel payments to pensioners. And the Telegraph focusing its attention on the Chancellor's take on the energy price cap with the headline, "Middle class need energy bills help," says Zahawi. And the Times also has the energy crisis on its front, warning of double-digit inflation for a year, with the headline, "Energy bills hit £3,500 with worst yet to come." And don't forget, you can scan the QR code that you can see on screen throughout the programme. Check out the front pages while you listen to us discussing them. And to discuss them, Susie Boniface and Sam Ashworth-Hayes. Thanks for being with us on, well, I have to say, it's a pretty depressing evening. All the front pages are going with the cost of living crisis, with this news today, the huge hike in the price cap. Susie, front of the Mirror, our whole country is facing an energy bills catastrophe. For heaven's sake, do something. Pictures there of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. The government, Susie, of course, would say that they have already done something and more help is on the way.
Well, what government exactly? Now, the Mirror's been reporting all week on a succession of voices from charities, from business, from energy firms, from politics, and from across the spectrum of British life, really, as well as individual families and people and businesses, all demanding something to be done. And, this morning, when we woke up and heard the news that the energy price cap was perhaps going to hit £6,500 next year, the first thing I did when I got out of bed was walk around the house, turning off everything I could find, right? I just switched everything off. I didn't need it. We're going to switch that off from now on. That's it. We're going to have to, at least that's the start of things. And at the same time, in the house of every single Tory government minister, they were switching off their phones. They were ignoring their emails. They were avoiding the airwaves. And seeing as these are people who are normally quite happy to spout and blow and expel some hot air out into the world, they stayed very, very quiet this morning, and they went into hiding, quite literally, because they just didn't want to have to explain how we got to this point, which is decades of lack of planning and preparation, and what they're going to do about it, which is we don't know. And the reason they don't know is because they're having a self-indulgent bit of Tory turmoil over who's the right person to replace an absolute liar in Parliament. And they're not walking around turning off their chargers at the sockets because they'll save them 50 pence, because this is a government by people who have never been short of 50 pence. They've never been at the till and had to put something back on the shelf because they couldn't afford it for the sake of 50 pence. And so these are the people who are trying to work out what they can do to help us, but they can't make these decisions because they don't have a prime minister. The prime minister they do have isn't prepared to make the decision either. And so this is it's just getting worse and worse. And even if they do come up with something in the next few weeks and months to come, there are people who are going to be going into this winter terrified. And that terror is going to mean that they are not turning the heating on. And it means that they're going to be more anxious. And it means they're more likely to commit suicide. And it means they're going to get too cold. And it means they're not going to eat well enough. And it means they're going to get more chest infections. And it means they're going to die because of the fear that is being spread. And it's not being handled by a government that is just able to go onto the airwaves and speak to us like grown-ups.
Well, the Prime Minister did speak, Susie, today, didn't he? To be fair to the Prime Minister, he did actually speak today.
He got caught in the end, yeah.
Yeah. Sam,
it's about a load of rubbish.
Sam, the headlines are depressing. They don't get any better on the front of The Guardian. Lives will be lost. We are in a state of limbo when it comes to the governance of the country. We still have to wait 10 days or so before we know who the next Prime Minister will be. Are you confident that the help that clearly is needed and that does have to come will be able to get to people in time?
I don't think it's a matter of timing so much as whether they actually know what they're going to be doing. Right now, it seems like the plan for the winter is hope for good weather. We don't have a sort of package of support being proposed for households yet. I know there's some discussion that Liz Truss may make an extra winter fuel payment for pensioners. Well, that's fine, but it's not going to address the needs of some of the lower income households, or even, as we'll be discussing shortly, some of the middle income households who will need additional help. And there's almost no discussion of what we're going to be doing to assist businesses through this, or even if we are going to be assisting them through this. There are people sort of saying that what we need to do here is let the free market take its course and allow that to allocate things, which is all well and good as a principle. But we don't have a completely free market in energy. It's very state regulated, it's very state governed. We have this price cap for residential consumers, which makes energy cheaper for them than it would be for businesses. So we're already putting a thumb on the scale in that direction. And of course, we're also going to be subsidizing them through the winter because they need to be able to heat their homes. And so this sort of idea that you can basically just do tax cuts and redistribute to households that way, and then leave it at that, I think is just woefully insufficient. And I think we really need to hear something from Truss and Sunak on what their plan would be.
Yeah, this is the thing, Sam, is that we're hearing a lot from people who are experts in this field, who've got some ideas, who really do want to help. There's Dale Vince from Ecotricity, there's Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert. They've been talking about what you could do right now to give an energy cap to help small businesses, because they are completely uncapped and they're going to the wall, and the economic cost of that will be immense. They're talking about uncoupling electricity prices, some of which is very cheap because it's from renewable sources, from the gas prices they're tied to at the moment, which are insanely expensive, so that the overall price does come down a bit for us. They're talking about capping the profits you can make out of North Sea oil and things like this, for example, to 2%, which is what the price cap is setting. There's lots of people who want to come forward, who you could easily get onto a committee of experts, as we did with COVID. We had the experts all came out, we had SAGE and said, well, these are the best things to do, and they present the plans to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, and they chose which one to do, despite what Rishi Sunak says. We could do that with the energy experts. We could do that with the energy companies and with the charities and with the people who are representing consumers. And it's not happening. And that doesn't require you to choose who the Prime Minister is. You could still have the think tank.
Do you not think, Susie, that the Treasury is the Treasury not doing this right now? Nadhim Zahawi today said, a lot of work is going on behind the scenes. The Treasury surely are crunching the numbers and speaking to experts and trying to work out a number of different scenarios so that they are ready to go when Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak take the keys to number 10.
Well, there's two problems with that. The first is just the group thinking within Whitehall, which means that the Treasury just has this long-established inability to spend other people's money. It wants to sit on it instead. And secondly, it's the fact that you've got whoever the Prime Minister is going to be, an ideological unwillingness to spend money on people. So they want to give tax cuts. They want to let you keep more of your own money. They don't want to give any of it back. That seems to be anti them. And so there's a hurdle you have to get over mentally to convince the likes of Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, whoever it might be in their governments, to actually, do as Rishi did in government under COVID, to have a furlough scheme, to start going, stuff free market, we're going to have a big intervention. And that's a huge jump that they just don't seem to be making yet. Okay. And meanwhile, as the Mirror is showing, people are really scared.
OK, I just want to talk about the front of the Daily Telegraph next, because you mentioned this, Sam. Nadhim Zahawi also saying today that the middle classes will need energy bills help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're sort of really underestimating the extent to which this could be really quite damaging for consumers if we just focus on the very bottom of the income distribution, because there will be a lot of people whose budgets are already being relatively strained by inflation, who are going to really feel the pinch when their bills start rocketing. And the idea that we can kind of save lots of energy, I think it may be borne out, but historically, energy demand in Britain from household consumers is really inelastic. And what it basically means is if prices go up 10%, energy use comes down 1%. So if you're basically relying on people finding ways to save energy, what that means is them turning off the heat. And that's exactly what we don't want to be doing in the winter. But the core problem here is when he says we're going to support households, which is probably what we should be doing, that implicitly comes at the expense of business, because what we're basically talking about here is how we're going to allocate the limited supply of energy we have. And the more you tip the scale one way, so the more people who are able to heat their homes, the flip side to that is the higher the cost of energy is for businesses, and the more of them will be going to the wall. So you end up with this sort of choice of, do you heat your home or do you keep your job? And it's a really unfortunate position for any leader to be in, particularly one just coming in. But the fact that it could be this severe this winter is why we really need to start knowing now what we can expect. Businesses have plans to make, households have budgets to make. And the fact that we're just in limbo while Boris sort of swans around on holiday it's beyond disgraceful.
Yeah. It's an interesting headline, that, isn't it, about the middle classes on the front of the Telegraph, because actually, Susie, it's also what Keir Starmer has been saying in a way, because his idea, freezing the price cap, will help the richest as well as the poorest, but he hasn't got a problem with that.
No, he's happy with that. They've done their sums, and that's what they've come up with. It was a Lib Dem idea originally, and it took a while for Labour to come around to it. But they seem to be making more noise than the Lib Dems did. But it's the middle classes that vote, unfortunately, and the poorer people generally are less likely to vote. And so this is the part of the electorate and the demographic which people are really going to care about. Likewise, older people, pensioners on fixed incomes, who aren't going to be able to go out and earn a bit of extra money, aren't going to be able to do an extra shift to pay for this. And we're also going to be looking at increased death rates from people who are more likely to get cold, more likely to have chest infections, more likely to be malnourished perhaps over the winter. And possibly if you tie that in with some kind of a COVID surge, maybe not a terrible strain, but even a mild strain in this situation could be really quite devastating.
Yeah.
And that's something that people really need to start thinking about as well.
OK, I just want to look at the eye as well, Sam. Truss U-turn on energy handout. She was avoiding the cameras today. She has said help will come immediately if she wins the leadership race. Also talked that potentially she could boost universal credit. But this U-turn is about winter fuel payments to pensioners.
Exactly. So, it's something rather than absolutely nothing, although I'm not sure it's actually been formally announced yet, as opposed to still being discussed as sources. But there are a lot of people who are going to need help who aren't pensioners. There are going to be sort of single-parent families who will be facing real financial strain. There are going to be people who are out of work or on benefits or disabled who are going to need this help as well. So the fact that we're still sort of framing this through the pensioners, and again, to return to the electoral dynamics of this, it makes sense that the Conservative Party will look after their core first. But we do need to know what's going to be done for everyone else.
Telegraph, Sam, and the paper revealing the possible cabinet under Liz Truss. And a few big names aren't going to be very happy.
No, absolutely not. And obviously the major casualty here is Priti Patel, who apparently has sort of been saying she'll only take the role of Home Secretary. She doesn't want to be moved along. And it seems like Truss is basically going to be moving in some of her own loyal figures into place from her own government. And some of the names being suggested are really interesting. We have Kemi Badenoch apparently listed as possibly up for a ministerial brief. We've got Kwasi Kwarteng. So it sort of looks like it's going to be quite a new look at the top of the Conservative Party, and hopefully, in an optimistic way, I'm sort of hoping we get some sort of more free market policy out of that than we've had over the last few years.
Susie, your thoughts?
Well, it says here that, Priti Patel's on her way out. It doesn't quite say why, which, of course, is the fact that she's failed miserably at everything she's been asked to do for the last few years. And the Home Office is just a basket case anyway, whoever runs it. But someone else is going to get that poor job, maybe Kemi Badenoch. But it doesn't say in here is that it was rumoured, I think last week, I don't know if it was ever stamped out, but that the new Levelling Up Secretary was going to be Jacob Rees-Mogg, which sounds like I just assumed that was a terrible internet joke when I heard it. But then it did seem to be a serious suggestion in one of the Sunday papers that he was going to be the person in charge of making sure everyone had a fair crack of the whip in the UK, which is Interesting.
Well, we shall find out in not very long, won't we? It's only less than 2 weeks' time. Talking of Liz Truss, there's another story on the front of the Telegraph. This is referring to the hustings that were held when she was asked the question, quite a good question, I thought, Sam, President Macron, friend or foe? And there's been quite a lot of diplomatic fallout as a result of her answer.
Yeah, possibly a slightly too blunt answer when she said the jury is out. But you know, Macron's saying, "Oh, we're going to have serious problems if we can't tell if France and Britain are friends or enemies." I don't think anyone's saying that. I think everyone considers there to be a strong relationship between France and Britain, military cooperation, economic cooperation for the most part. Whether or not that translates as we think Emmanuel Macron can be trusted to act in our interest is an entirely different matter. Although I guess the thing about that is you may well think it. The advisability of saying it when you're about to become prime minister is another matter entirely. And I thought it was quite a strange response in that the votes are basically already cast. There's really not much need to be doing this sort of playing to Slexerot. So quite why she sort of felt the need to come out and say it quite as bluntly as she did is something of a mystery to me.
Yeah, what happened there, Susie? Was she just caught on the hoof, or do you think she genuinely?
It's the fact that this is the person who's going to be the prime minister. It's not that she's not saying things because she thinks that the things she needs to say to get elected. She's saying things because she genuinely thinks this stupid stuff. And what she thinks in this particular instance is, oh, the French, which is what people have been thinking in this country for about 1,000 years. I think, pretty much since 1066. And by the way, they were Vikings. But ever since, it's like our rulers have to, the Plantagenets were half in France and half here, and our taxes went over there, and all that. And that whole argument just was. The wound was reopened by the Brexit debate, and now they're being used to constantly have a fight with the French. It's the French's fault for this. It's the gas prices of the French's fault. It's their nuclear reactors that's the fault. It's the migrants that's all their fault. They're not doing enough. They were tear-gassing migrants on the beach at Calais in today's papers. They're doing quite a bit. But now to sit there and say, I don't know if he's friend or foe. Emmanuel Macron, if anybody doesn't realise, is actually a centre-right politician. He's on the conservative side of things. And for someone who's a conservative to go, oh, well, I don't want to talk to him, it's just the kind of stupid thing that Priti Patel's been doing for the last 3 years with no purpose whatsoever and no success.
Susie, I'm a bit worried you're going to burst a blood vessel, so I'm going to line things up with the Mac cartoon. Sam, just talk us through this, because it is a funny one.
Yep. So he has nailed it again, as they say. He's sort of, his email from Nigerian Prince looks genuine. The energy bill must be a scam. It really is unbelievable how high prices are going and how high they're going to go from here, although less of a laughing matter.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thanks both.